This is an interesting panel in the Thousand-Year Blood War. By the simple act of squaring up to a literal death god for Ichigo's sake, I think we can all agree that Keigo is a really solid dude, and a lot of us would do well to have friends like him. Obviously, if he wanted to, Kyoraku could literally slap him out of existence, but the truly tragic thing about this scene, and this is true, is that while he half expected this reaction, if anyone was gonna grab onto his collar and stare him down so passionately, he'd probably want it to be Tatsuki. And now he has to deal with this pubescent piece of shit. However, what eludes most of us is the true meaning behind the words that got this reaction out of Keigo. Right now, Ichigo has gone to a place that is quite exceptional even within the Soul Society. He's talking about the Soul King's palace. Believe me, I have every faith that he will return safely. What worries me though is the question of what manner of power he will have obtained when he does return. Depending on the nature of his new power, it's possible that it could have unwanted effects on the human world. If that does happen, we will not be able to permit him to return to this world. So what is this new power that could have unwanted effects on the world of the living? I think a lot of us at the time assumed it would be something similar to Aizen after he fused with the Hogyoku, when he would literally leave trails of dead bodies in his wake simply by having a stroll. And as if baiting us into relating Aizen's situation to Kyoraku's words, Kubo even craftily fostered this assumption by having him say them to Keigo, Mizuhiro, and Tatsuki, the three humans that witnessed Aizen's power and lived to tell the tale. It's only after reading the novel that we understand the gravity of that 1 in 10,000 scenario that Kyoraku was speaking of, courtesy of an exchange between him and Ichibe. A peculiar post-war conversation that reveals Ichibe considered Ichigo to be the backup to the Soul King. In the event that Yuha Bak succeeded in killing the Soul King, Ichibe would use his dominion over names, sealing Ichigo to the name Soul King. He reiterates that Ichigo never stood a chance against Yuha, something we first hear him say in chapter 612 in an oddly spine-chilling tone. However, the context he provides in the novel is significantly more appalling and ghastly than even Kyoraku could have imagined. Expecting the Soul King to fall at the hands of Yuha Bak, the only outcome that would have been favorable to Ichibe would have been Ichigo's defeat. Why? Because it would make him easier to subdue and enshrine as the new Soul King. Also, he could act as a new linchpin to support the three worlds. And if you're wondering why did it have to be Ichigo, well, at the time he confronted Yuha at the Soul King's palace in chapter 613, he was the only known character to possess all the qualities required to be the Soul King due to his mixed lineage. I say known because, unbeknownst to most, Ginjo was also a suitable candidate, and Hikone, basically a chimera of the different races, would later be created exclusively for that role. But that's a whole can of worms for another day. So predicting that the Soul King would die, Ichibe was resolute in his plan to sacrifice Ichigo, all for the sake of the world. And in hindsight, reading what he says in the chapter is rather deceptively innocuous. You realize that in Ichibe's mind, there's no room for sentiment when it comes to defending the stability of the three realms. Just a wide-eyed, deadpan face, as he very calmly implies in the most cryptic monologue the horrors he'll have to resort to. Apparently, that's what peace is all about. With the Soul King dead, that 1 in 10,000 scenario that Kyoraku mentioned was looking really inevitable. But Ichigo did manage to dodge a bullet, and ironically it's Yuha Bak that he has to thank for that. Because when Yuha absorbed the Soul King's power, he effectively assumed the role of the new Soul King. Consequently, after his defeat, it's his remains that are revered as the foundational balance of the three worlds in their current state. And just so we're clear, if it did come to pass that Ichigo would serve as a new Soul King, it's pretty much implied that his seal would render him unconscious. Maybe not as bad a treatment as his predecessor, who endured chopping off the limbs and evisceration of his internal organs, but he'd definitely be reduced to a helpless puppet straddling the line between life and death for eternity. So to say the least, Kyoraku really downplayed the enormity of the disservice they would do to Ichigo. Ichibe's plan typifies the darkest hidden side of the Soul Society, and to this day it terrifies me how fast they were willing to turn on someone they once called their savior, all so they could keep the wheels turning. Like with most aspects of the series, it highlights this grey area of morality that the Shinigami constantly have hanging over their shoulders. The role of the Soul King is the farthest thing from an enviable position. Kyoraku mentions, rightly so, that it would be the worst case for Ichigo, which is why he takes it upon himself to be the bearer of bad news. But putting it into perspective, you have to question what impact the soul tickets would have had. It's stated they allow their user to travel freely between the world of the living and Soul Society, so context aside, Kyoraku generally comes off as sincere in this scene. But once in the Soul Society, it's hard to imagine they'd let humans into the Soul King Palace just so they could pay a visit to a friend in a coma, which is essentially how Ichibe would view their intentions. To begin with, the Zero Squad is an autonomous organization operating outside the mandate of the Central 46, so you'd think Kyoraku's authority as Captain Commander wouldn't really hold any weight in the matter. In all likelihood, the farthest they'd be able to get would be the Seirete, and that's only if they were absolutely discreet. But I like Kyoraku, and while I think he is sometimes a crafty son of a bitch, in the most endearing way of course, I'm also inclined to believe he was looking out for Ichigo's best interests by handing the soul tickets to his friends. Kinda. So instead of viewing his gesture as an empty token that wouldn't amount to much, I'd like to think he was also owning up to it and taking responsibility for his actions like he mentioned in the chapter. Otherwise, he wouldn't go out of his way to travel all the way to the world of the living for an effort in futility. Having said that, it could just have been a preemptive plot to appease his family and friends if the worst case scenario did come to pass. It's hard to imagine Isshin would be okay with sacrificing his own son, so there's also an element of Kyoraku being proactive in preventing dissent and potential rebellion by showing the Soul Society's sincerity in the matter. After all, having witnessed Yuha's villainy, it wouldn't exactly be ideal to be sowing the seeds for a future war. If Ichibe's plan did come to fruition, another thing Kyoraku was possibly banking on was the will of the Soul King, decipherable only to those of the Royal Guard. It's a reason why Ichigo was initially taken up to the Soul Palace and presumably what Kyoraku had in mind when handing out the tickets, because at the end of the day, the will of the Soul King at that point would essentially be the will of Ichigo, and who's to say whether or not he would grant his friends and family entry. That being said, seeing Ichigo in that state would surely have been cruel, particularly to Karin and Yuzu, who Kyoraku did also hand tickets to off-screen, but I'm guessing he figured they at least deserved the opportunity. If I'm looking at this scene objectively, Kyoraku is just covering all his bases to try and snuff out a potential uprising by Ichigo's bloodline, cause Isshin aside, we still don't know what Karin and Yuzu are capable of. For all we know, under the right guidance, they could grow up to be just as powerful as Ichigo, and that's one scary proposition. Like Tozen, you could say Kyoraku has a propensity for choosing the path of least bloodshed. But on the flip side, knowing what we know of him, while he can be unabashedly devious to those who show hostility, he is pretty forthright with his allies. In the same way it can be viewed as a calculating approach, handing out the tickets to Ichigo's friends is a matter of basic decency and consideration, one that violates the antiquated laws of Soul Society, which is exactly why he does so without the knowledge of the Central 46, so you do have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. How do you think Ichigo would have reacted if you knew what Ichibe was planning? Under different circumstances, Ichigo would be, in all but name, dead. And not by the hands of an Aizen or a Yuha, but by the very people he trusted. We were this close to losing our orange-haired protagonist. If you like this kind of content, I'm thinking of delving a bit more into the novels and supplementing it with what we know from the canon manga. So leave a like on the video and subscribe for more Bleach content, cause it does give me the push to do a bit more, a bit faster, a bit better. Thanks for watching guys, until next time, stay safe. Peace.